Hello everyone and welcome to this week's extension tutorial. In this one, I'm going to show you how to automatically generate thumbnails for your extension that will play and pause when you hover over them. So this is basically going to be a method that I use in most of the extensions that I work on, where you basically automatically generate all of these based on a folder full of items, and then when you hover over them, they'll switch to a video, and then when you unhover over them, they'll switch back to an image. The reason you don't want to load just a bunch of videos is because if you have like 100 presets, loading 100 videos at once isn't very practical. So we're basically going to be using these two examples here, each with a video and an image file, and our extension through JavaScript is going to automatically go through and generate these thumbnails inside of our test extension. And just a quick note, if you guys happen to have the Brave browser set up with basic attention token, you can now tip my channel as it's been verified, but don't worry about just setting it up just to tip me because there is a bit of KYC and annoying background process involved. If you've already got it set up, feel free to tip, and it's super helpful for the channel. So let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to be using is our extension testing that we've been using for the past couple of videos, and we're going to modify it. So we're going to get rid of this button, and we're just going to have a big section for all of our video previews. So let's go ahead and just dive straight in. We're going to go into the HTML file, and I'm going to remove this button here. And you can see we already have a section cut out called preview section. So I'm going to load up our styles.css, and under the preview section, I'm just going to set the background color to be red so that we can see how large the preview section is. So now if I go ahead and load up our extension, you can see this is how big our preview section is. And we forgot to save this to get rid of the button as well, so we'll refresh that. So this is our preview section. I think we could make it a little bit bigger just to make sure that it can support any size we want. So let's just say like 600 by 500, and that should be a good starting point. This is the box in which we're going to put all of our video generated elements. We're going to be using the preview section, and we're going to basically read the stuff from our computer. So inside of this first initial function here is where we're going to actually put it. What we're going to do is say generate previews. We're going to create a function called generate previews, which I'll just replace right here. And inside of here is where we need to do all of the work. But before we can generate the previews, we need to get the paths of the folder or the actual preview items. There's a couple ways you can do it. You can refer just to the folder that they're located in, or you could get each element individually. And the way we're going to do this is by using an ExtendScript script. So if I go into my extension testing folder and load up our AfterEffects.jsx, you can see we just have a couple of functions in here, one called test. We're going to change the name of this test function into getPreviewPaths, and it's going to require the argument path because we're going to give it the path or the folder path to all of our presets in this particular case. Now there are several ways we can actually get the path. The first of which is by just giving it the distinct path. For example, if we go back into our extension and maybe we had a preset folder in here, we could just have all of the presets located in here. So all we have to do is refer to the path of the actual extension and then say go into the presets folder and search in here. So you can see we already have a path variable set up in here. Let's go ahead and alert it just to see what it is. So when we launch the extension, it should alert first off what the path is. You can see we get C, program files, common files, Adobe CEP extensions, and it's cut off. So actually let's slice the path maybe at like 60 to path.length. And this should just give us a more visible view of what the actual path ends at. So now we're going to get, it ends with extension testing. And you can see it has this %20. That's just a weird way of saying space, which we'll fix later. I think I can just use this path and move the presets into here. So I'll just copy and paste these into our new extension testing presets folder. And since we know our path that we're getting right here refers to the actual extension path, all we need to do is add presets to the end of it. So let's go ahead and just say path plus equals presets. And now let's go ahead and alert the path again and slice it and just see what we get. But now you can see we're getting extension testing and presets. So our path has been updated, which is good. Now let's go ahead and send path through our generate previews. And we need to have path again in here, or we can say this path just to make sure it's not conflicting with this one up here. And now under generate previews, what we need to do is go into our JavaScript and get the actual path names. So I'm going to need to create a new CS interface object, and we'll do that by typing in CS interface. And of course we need a new one. So now we have a CEP object we can use to evaluate a script. And now what I'm going to do is grab my CS interface and say .eval script. And the script I'm going to evaluate, or the method or function, is going to be get preview paths. And we need to give it the path. So instead of just typing in path like this, that's not going to work. We need to go ahead and insert the actual variable here by doing plus and then this path. And then we need to make sure we close that back out. And we can also put in a second argument because we need to get the paths back. So I'm going to just paste this from a previous script, but the argument or callback is going to be this function, and we're going to need to create a variable for the preset names. So I'll create a variable called preset names and just set it to undefined for now because we're going to fill it in here. And basically what this means is we're starting with an empty preset names. Then we're going to create a new CS interface so we can interact with this script in here. And then using that new object, we're going to evaluate the get preview paths function, which we're going to fix here in a minute. And then we're going to give it this path so that the argument path will give us the proper path. So inside of here, let's go ahead and change it to alert path. And then we're just saying once the function returns something, we're going to parse that information and set it as the preset names. We're going to return basically an object or an array full of all of the paths to the specified video or image files that we want. So what we're going to do now, I think we should just be able to run this and see if it works. Go ahead and save it and restart the extension. You can see we're getting unable to execute script at line 1, expected parentheses. I think I need to enclose this path in double quotes because it's a string. Let's try that. There we go. So now we're getting the script alert from our preview paths. That's going to give us the path. And the path is referring to our extension testing folder plus the presets folder. So now inside of our extend script file, we can go ahead and get all of the files. So we'll just create a variable called files. We'll set this equal to we're going to make a folder object with our current path, and we're going to say .get files. So what we actually should say before is this folder is equal to our folder object with our path, because I want to check that this folder .exists. So now you can see it is true. This folder does indeed exist. So now we can say our files is going to be equal to this folder .get files. And if I alert our files, we should get a list of all of the files within here, at least their paths. So now what this script is going to do is send back these paths to the image files and the video files back into the extension, into our preset name variable. And what we're going to do with that is use a for loop to run through all of them and generate them. So what we need to do is go ahead and return our files. But since we are going to be using JSON to parse this, we're going to stringify our array full of files. So I'm going to say return JSON.stringify, and we're going to stringify those files. Now if we go back into our generate previews function and alert our preset names and run the extension, we're going to get undefined. This is sort of now time to teach you a little trick where we need to have the extension wait. There's something inside of extensions called asynchronicity, where the extension HTML and JavaScript and all that is running at a separate speed and a separate level than our actual script file. The reason for this is just because they're different types of code, and what we need to actually do before we alert our preset names is set a timeout. So what we're going to do is use the set timeout function, which will basically require a function argument as well as the time number. We're going to time it out in milliseconds. So let's say we'll wait for 2000 milliseconds. This is overkill and we won't need to wait for 2 seconds, but just to show you how it works, this should be good. So inside of here, if we put in our alert preset names, it's going to execute this function, alert preset names, 2 seconds after all of this code. It's going to tell everything to timeout and wait because it's been a bad script. It's going to tell everything to timeout. It's going to put it in a timeout for 2 seconds because it's been a bad extension. So we're going to wait for the script to do all this stuff for 2 seconds and then alert the preset names. So if we save it and rerun it. And here's the problem with JavaScript. If you miss a single character and mess it up like me, then you're going to find problems. So now we need to make sure we close out this anonymous function here and then close it out with a parenthesis, not a bracket. So now if I start it up, we should wait 2 seconds and then we're going to get our alert message. So we're going to get a couple of objects here, and each of these objects is referencing basically our file objects. So instead of just getting file objects, I just want to get the paths. So I can go back now into my JavaScript file, and I'm going to say variable file names, a new array there, and we're going to loop through all of our files real quick. So our I is equal to 0, I is less than our files.length, increment I by 1, and each time we're going to grab our file names and push our current files we're on, and we're going to grab the fs name, which references the entire path of the file. So we're going to get the fs name of each of them, which refers to the full path. So now I'm going to have, instead of files, our file names. And now if we alert the preset names, let's see what we get. Wait 2 seconds, which will change here in a sec. And now you can see we're getting, instead of an array of objects, we're going to get an array full of those exact paths. This one is the 01 MP4, and it gets cut off. So I'm going to go ahead and change this, instead of 2000 or 2 seconds, to like 200. And this is going to be something you have to experiment with. So the timeout is going to be dependent on your extension project. If you have a ton of stuff you're loading, you're going to want to make it a little bit higher. If you don't have very much to load when you're going into your JavaScript extended file, you're just going to want a smaller amount. And generally I've found 200 to 500, depending on how many files, is usually a good range. So now we know our preset name variable has a list of all of those files we need. But we are getting the MP4 and PNG files. What we're actually going to want to do is generate just images inside of our extension. We don't want to load 1,000 videos theoretically, which would be extremely taxing on our CPU. So what I'm going to do is add a small if statement when we're pushing all of our file names. I'm only going to want to push the file names that have PNG in them. So what I'm going to say is if our files i.name.index of .png does not equal -1, which means that this string contains .png, then we're going to want to push that. So let's go ahead and double check that that works before we move back into the JavaScript. And we should just get a list of PNG files now. You can see we have 01.png and 02.png, which is perfect. And what we can do later to load up the videos, we don't have to go back into our extend script. We can just basically slice off the extension of our PNG and add an MP4 instead. That way we can save processing time. So instead of calling this generate previews, I'm going to call this get preview names, and I'm going to change the name here. And now instead of alerting the preset names, I'm going to generate the previews now that we have our preset names. So we're going to use those preset names we got to generate the previews. So let's create the function for generate previews, and we need to make sure our variables are named right. We're going to have our names. And one thing to check is always make sure you're actually getting to this function. I'm just going to alert the names again just to make sure we're properly flowing through everything. So now we're still getting those names, which is good. That means we're inside of the generate previews function. So now we're going to populate this big red box full of our image previews. In order to do this, we're going to start by creating a for loop, and we're going to loop through all of our names. So if our I is equal to 0, I is less than our names.length, and increment I by 1. Then we need to go ahead and grab this preview section by using basic JavaScript, and we're going to create a variable called, just call it preview section. It's going to be equal to our document.getElement by ID, and I'm going to get the ID preview section. And just to make sure this works, I'm going to alert our preview section.id, and it should give us preview section. So when I run it, I get preview section, which means we've successfully gotten this big red box into a variable. So what we're going to do is also create an empty variable called maybe this image. And each time we loop through, we're going to be using this to set our image up. So I'm going to say this image is equal to document.createElement, and we're going to create an image element. So each time through this for loop, we're going to create a new image element and set it equal to this image. Now we can call this image and set the source equal to our names and the current name. This will set the source to be whatever our image, current image in the list is. And then what I'm going to do to add this to the big red box, I'm going to grab our preview section and say Appendchild, which is basically a way of saying we're going to add it into this element. And we're going to append this current image. So let's go ahead and run this and see how it works. Now you can see we've successfully automatically read and generated these two images. I'm not going to go too crazy on this tutorial in terms of designing and setting all the orientation of things up, but the main purpose is just going to be to get these images to preview now. So what I'm going to do is set up an ID for each of these images, which will contain the path, and then I can take that ID and just add maybe MP4 to the end. So when we hover over it, it'll take the ID of the image element, add MP4, and start playing the video. So what I'm going to do is say this image dot set attribute, and whenever we set an attribute, what we're doing is setting like an attribute like the class or the ID. But in our case, what we're going to do is set the attribute for the ID. And the attribute we're going to set is going to be names I, which again is our full path. And what we're going to do is cut off the extension. We'll cut off the PNG at the end, which is 3. So I'm going to grab names I.slice, and we're going to start at 0, the beginning of the name, and go until names I.length minus 3. And then one more thing, we're going to grab this image and set the attribute for on mouse over. And what this is going to do is go into a function, which let's go ahead and just call mouse hover, and we're going to give it this, and I need to enclose this in quotes as well. And what this means is when we hover over with the mouse, we're going to activate this function called mouse hover. So if I create a function called mouse hover, and we need our argument of this, and this refers to itself. So it's going to be giving it this current image. So whatever we want to call that, we'll just call it current image. And inside of mouse hover, I'm going to alert mouse hovered. And then I'm also going to alert our current image.id to make sure that we're getting this path that we just set up right here and that it's accurate. So let's go ahead and save it and run our extension. And when I hover over it, you can see it says mouse hovered. And we're going to get the path, which we have all of this text and then 01 dot nothing. So we can theoretically, when we hover over it, just add MP4 and change it to make sure that it works properly. So what we're going to do when we hover over the element, what we want it to do, we can't just say change this image to a video. What we need to do is basically delete the image element and insert a video element. So the first thing we need to do is get the parent or the big red box that it's contained in. So I'll create a variable called parent and set this equal to our current image.parent. And actually not just parent, it needs to be parent node because everything is referred to as a node. So then what we're going to do is say we need a video, which we're going to set equal to document.createElement, and we'll say video. And then let's go ahead and create a variable to store that ID. So we'll say temp path is equal to our current image.id. And then we need to remove the current image. So I'm going to say parent.removeChild, and we're going to remove the current image. So now when we run this, it should just give us the deletion of that element, I believe. We hover over it, it actually deletes both of them, which makes sense because as we deleted that element, the second one jumped up and we were technically hovering over it, so it deleted it as well. So it's a little bit not representative of how this is overall going to work, but now what we need to do is set up our video. So I'm going to say video.src. We're going to get the new source for the video is going to be equal to our temp path, and we're going to remember add MP4 to the end of it so we can get that video working. Then I'm going to take the parent element and I'm going to say insert before, and what we're going to insert is our video element, and we're going to insert it before any other elements inside of our big red parent box. So I'm going to say insert the video element before our parent dot child nodes, and we're going to grab the first child node. And that should put it in there. Now let's go ahead and test it out. If we hover over it, you can see it's a little bit of a jump, but we got the video element to load. We think we need to actually play the video element. So let's go ahead and say video.play. So now when we hover over it, you can see it's going to load up that video and start playing it for us. So that's actually going to be it for the mouse hover. Now we need to do the opposite. When we move the mouse outside of the video, we need to move it back to an image so it just has that quick preview. Because again, if you're loading hundreds of videos potentially, and you're hovering over all of them, playing and pausing, that's going to be extremely taxing and can easily crash your extension. Now that we have that done, what we should also do is set the ID of this video back to that same kind of format we have. Remember when we sliced off the PNG? Well, let's do the same thing for our video ID. So when we move the mouse off of the video, it can easily use that path and just add PNG back to it. So I'm gonna say video.setAttribute. We'll set the ID to be our temp path. And that doesn't need to change at all because it's already set up the way we need it. So now inside of here, we also need to set an attribute for, instead of on mouse over, on mouse out, which means the opposite. So I'll say video.setAttribute. Instead of on mouse over, we'll say on mouse out. So when the mouse leaves the box, then we want to do something called mouse unhover, or whatever you'd like to call it. So I'll create a function called mouse unhover, and we're going to say current video because we know it's a video element, and we're going to do something extremely similar to this here. So let's just copy and paste the code and modify it to our needs. We're going to need the parent element again, the big red box, and then we're going to need to, instead of say video, we're going to create an image, and the temp path is accurate. We just need that path of where it is without the extension. And then we need to, instead of removing the current image, remove the current video. And instead of adding MP4, we'll add PNG. And we don't need to play the video. We need to change video to be image. And we're going to change on mouse out to on mouse over. We're kind of have to regenerate this right here. So we'll change this to mouse hover. And I believe that should be it. Let's see if that works. So we're going to mouse over. We've got our video to play. And now we mouse out. Alright, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on, so this is a good time to show you how I problem solve in JavaScript. It's called brute force, where we're just going to type in alert 1, and we're going to type in our alerts here until we get basically to whatever alert, and we're going to see where it stops, so that way we can see where the problematic code might be. So I've filled this up with a bunch of alerts here. Let's see how far we get when we move the mouse outside of our video. So we'll mouse over, we got our video. Now we mouse out. Actually, this is one of my frustrations with JavaScript, is that I just missed that right there. It needs to be current video instead, and this needs to be current video as well. So now let's try it. Save it and relaunch the extension. We mouse over, we get the video to load. We mouse out, we get a bit of a failure on the image part. So let's fix the path or whatever it seems to be the problem here. Let's go ahead and alert whatever temp path seems to be. And then let's see how far we get after that. Maybe we could see what temp path plus PNG is afterward. So we'll launch it, on mouse out, we're gonna get .mp4. So it looks like the temp path needs to be sliced. So I'm going to take temp path and set it equal to temp path dot slice from the beginning, and then we want to cut off the MP4 that we saw at the end. So I'll say temp path dot length -3, and now that should do what we want here. Let's see. We don't need to do that. Just get the one temp path and launch the extension. Video loaded. Now when we hover out, we're going to get the correct path. And now you can see, boom, switch right to an image. And I can do the same thing with this. And it seems like once we go back into the mouse hover, it seems to have some issues. So let's check here again what temp path in here is. I think it's giving it too long of a path. So I'll launch the extension, and the current path is accurate. And when we mouse back over, you can see it has the PNG again. Whenever we alert the temp path, it needs to be missing this PNG in our particular case. For this setup, we just want to give it up to this dot, or the before the extension, so we can easily add PNG, JPEG, MP4, MOV, whatever your extension is. So one thing I'm going to check, so when we get temp path, we need to check whether or not it has that PNG or whatever at the end. So what I'm going to do is, if our temp path dot, so what I'm going to do, I think, is say if our temp path dot last index of dot is less than our temp path dot length, meaning that if it finds that there's a dot before the end of the string, then I think that's when we need to slice it. So let's try that. Alert temp path after it to see if we're properly parsing it. Now we hover over, we'll get our video. No, we won't. So I'm going to alert temp path dot last index of that dot and see what we get. And then I also need to get temp path dot length and compare them, because I might just be off by 1 or 2. So I'll save it, run the extension. We're going to get 85, 86. So let's go ahead and say -1. And then we'll say alert temp path and see if this is working now. Hover over, get our video to load, hover out, get our image to load, hover back over, get our video to load, and I think we have it working now. Let's go ahead and remove the alerts to see it all at full speed. And now we should be able to hover over, get our video, back to the image, back to the video, back to the image, etc. So this is just a basic way to automatically read the files inside of your system and get them to load quickly and preview quickly when you hover your mouse over and off. I know it was a long tutorial, but I wanted to go into complete depth on how this is done and show you my process of how I typically do it. There are many different methods you can use to accomplish this, but this is probably one of the simple, to go into your extend script as little as possible to save time, because again, remember, we need to set the timeout because it's been a very bad extension, and we need to wait in order to get that information before we actually generate things sometimes. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to hit the thumbs up button, hit subscribe down below and the bell icon to be notified of new videos coming out twice weekly. Don't forget, this month is all about extensions, lots of long tutorials like this, as well as quick tips to get you going. Again, the code for this will be in the description down below in the GitHub link. It'll be in the starting format of how I started this tutorial, and you'll be able to follow it and add everything as you wish. You can also follow us down below on Instagram to be notified of when new videos are coming out twice weekly. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below for future tutorials. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.